Of all the magnificent men and women of the Bible, why would I pick Jonah to write my novel, Jonah in the Time of the Kings? Well, here's something you might not realize. Jonah was a hero, a man full of courage. He gets a bad rap. That's what I think. You see, God sent Jonah to the most wicked and violent city on the face of the earth. How many of us would walk into a city like that? Now, I will admit that at first he didn't want to go. But he got over it and he went. And it wasn't because he was afraid. That's not why he didn't want to go. His message that he was to deliver for God on his behalf was a little bit at cross purposes with what Jonah thought he was supposed to be doing, which was bringing Israel back to God. The second thing about Jonah, which is so wonderful, is this. It's the story of relationship. First and foremost, the theme running through Jonah is God's love for all mankind. Secondarily, it's the story of one man's relationship with God. And Jonah had a unique and a close relationship with God. As a matter of fact, I think he spoke to God in a way that most people wouldn't even think of. And yet God allowed him to get away with it because they were so close. It was almost as if it was a father-son or employer-employee relationship. And Jonah was determined to do God's will. It's just that he had to make sure that it was the same one that fit up with what he thought should be going on. So Jonah had a mind of his own at times, but when all was said and done, he did what God asked him to do. And he went to that wicked and violent city, and he proclaimed God's message to the Ninevites. And that whole country, it says in the book of Jonah, turned to the one true God. They all turned to God and worshipped him. And they turned away from their wickedness and their violence, which was extreme. And the third thing I love about Jonah in the Time of the Kings and the book of Jonah is this. Jonah was a little bit like you and I. Of course, God asks us to do something at times, and we want to, but we don't really do it for one reason or another. We shy away, and then maybe we go ahead and do it. And really, the book of Jonah helped me understand myself, how to walk with God in a different way. And spending so much time researching it, it was really helpful to me to see how Jonah related to God in such a personal and intimate way. I do think there is a similarity between the times of Jonah in 762 BC and the times we have today in the United States. Not identical, but similar. First of all, the rulers in Israel at that time were evil, all the kings in the north. Now you have to understand, at this time in history, 762 BC, the country had been divided for almost 200 years. So those kings in the north, from Jeroboam I all the way to Jeroboam II, with a number of kings in between, had set up idol worship as the national religion. They'd turned from the God of Moses, the God who had led them into the promised land. And they had turned to the pagan gods to worship. So God really couldn't protect them very well. Secondarily, they misused the poor mercilessly, especially in the north. Even though during this time in history, Israel had expanded to a great degree, almost to the borders of what Solomon had. They were wealthy, and yet they misused their own people mercilessly. And that was one of the aspects of life that God really hated. They didn't take care of the widows. The wives and children many times were thrown from their homes or their vineyards or whatever they owned if there wasn't a man present, and misused by the rich to the point that some of them were indentured servants. And it disgusted God. So Jonah at the time was sent to Israel as a prophet to bring to pass the changing of the country back to God. So in one sense, he was at cross purposes with what God had asked him to do, which was go to Assyria, to Nineveh, and to preach to the most evil, wicked country on the face of the earth, and that city in particular. Because here's the thing. Jonah knew that Nineveh, if they repented, would attack Israel. And what I've tried to do is stay very close to the historical facts of the book of Jonah. and yet at the same time to elucidate, to bring it to life in a way that will make it entertaining to read, educational, and ultimately and finally I want somebody to finish Jonah in the Time of the Kings and want to walk to their bookshelf, get their Bible, and read the book of Jonah. That's my goal for that. That it's so exciting and captivating that that's what you want to do. The differences in terms of characters in Jonah in the Time of the Kings are this. There are some added characters in this book. For instance, Amos takes part in the book. Amos was a prophet in Judah at the time, but also in Israel, and he was contemporary with Jonah. And I believe that they spent time together and did work together as prophets of the Lord. Also, I've given Jonah some other family characters, as well as a fiancé and a mother-in-law, because there's nothing in the Bible that states that Jonah ended his life as a prophet after he left Nineveh. And so I've kind of filled it out and made it, hopefully, exciting to read and entertaining, but educational, to give you a sense of what was it like to be a prophet of the Lord. What was it like to be Jonah? Well, I tried to stay very true to the historical aspects of Jonah at the same time to make it live. And what we did is spend a lot of time in research, going to different museums throughout the world, Great Britain, in Ireland, in the United States, but secondarily, really spent time not only studying Israel more, but studying Assyria. Because what happens in the book of Jonah is this. Jonah is asked to go to Nineveh, the most violent and wicked city on the face of the earth, and he's asked to get those people to change from their wickedness because it's so bad that they're in God's face, is the way God says it. Well, Assyria at the time was a war machine. It was a war machine in the sense that when Assyria came to your country or your city, you're going down. Now, the only way to avoid that at that time in history was this, that you'd have to pay tribute to the king of Assyria. And if you didn't pay tribute, that was it. They were coming in. They had siege machines, they had chariots, they had the best archers, and they were systematized, and they were good. And everyone was afraid of them. So I wanted to bring to life some of these events and what it was like to be Jonah, walking into Nineveh, this violent city, as if you were a Hebrew walking into Berlin during World War II, proclaiming that the Lord was going to destroy Berlin in 40 days. How does the whale fit into Jonah? Well, here's the situation. It doesn't say in the biblical text that Jonah was swallowed by a whale, even though it appears to in Matthew. Really, when you look at the word in Greek, the word whale is fish. So we don't really know what kind of fish it was. Now, it's true that in Jonah in the Time of the Kings, I decided to use a sperm whale as my fish. And here's why. The sperm whale is a great diver. And he loves to dive. He'll dive for over a mile to get dinner. And you know what he wants for dinner? He wants a giant squid. And giant squid are about the size of a man. So he'll gulp them down, and that's what he likes for dinner. Now, a shark, on the other hand, I found unlikely to want to be carrying a man across a certain area and dropping him off. Sharks just have too many teeth. I mean, they're just too much of biters and eaters. I just can't imagine the shark doing it. So I did pick the sperm whale as my choice of transportation. Although, as I said before, it does not specifically say it was a whale.